The first foundation of legitimacy for this state has been utterly shattered. The second foundation is popular sovereignty, popular will. Make no mistake, beyond the sort of autocratic and dictatorial nature of this regime, you've got to understand that this is a regime that is scared to death of its own people, as it should be. It knows better than anyone the power that united Iranian people can have to create profound political change. That's how it came to power. And so that is why elections in Iran are taken very seriously. In fact, it may come as a shock for you to learn that before the previous election in June, Iran has had some dozen or so of the freest and fairest elections in the entire Middle East outside of Israel. Now, that is a pathetic statement, but it's true. It says more about the Middle East than it says about Iran. Elections are sacred things in Iran. 50 million out of 70 million people voted in last summer's elections. In 2005, the elections that brought Mahmoud Ahmadinejad to power the first time was actually part of a massive nationwide boycott. 60% of the electorate voted. In my country, the United States, where we just had one of the most exciting elections in recent memory, the largest turnout of any modern election in recent American history, we just cracked 30%. Iranians take their elections very seriously. Yes, there's graft. Yes, there's corruption. Newsflash, there's graft and corruption in Australia's elections. No offense, Madam Mayor. Does she leave? But the kind of bald-face stealing of an election that we saw last June simply doesn't happen in Iran. It's absolutely unprecedented. And that, I think, in great part explains the overwhelming reaction of the Green Movement to that stolen elections. One really interesting thing that's happened as a result of these elections and the increasing dictatorial policies of Ahmadinejad and the Revolutionary Guard to maintain control over the country is that for the first time, certain words and phrases, certain comparisons that you just have not heard in Iran for 3 decades are now starting to be bandied about. Specifically, this government is now being directly compared to the dreaded tyrannous government of the Shah. That's a standard comment now. In fact, Mir Hussein Mousavi, the erstwhile leader of the Green Movement, if there is one, made this interesting comment: stifling the media, filling prisons, brutally killing people who peacefully demand their rights, indicate the roots of tyranny and dictatorship that remain from the monarchist era. This is just about the worst thing you can say to the Islamic regime. All of this is to say that the message of the Green Movement has become embedded in Iran. Every Iranian now recognizes it. And what is that message? It's a simple one. It's that the Islamic Republic is neither Islamic nor a republic. And that is a powerful message. Now, what does this mean? Where do we go from here? How does this play out? I guess a lot of that remains to be seen. To put it in the simplest way, I'd say that Iran is essentially balancing on a dangerous precipice right now. There are 2 possible outcomes for Iran. On the one hand, it could very easily become another North Korea. It could very easily become another Burma, a military dictatorship, a closed police state with no rights, no privileges whatsoever, completely isolated from the rest of the world. But on the other hand, Iran could just as easily become another China, Now, China, North Korea, okay, those aren't the best options, I understand. The truth is, however, that if you asked any Iranian on the street if they would take China, they would say yes in a heartbeat. What do I mean by China? What I mean is an oligarchical state, one in which power still remains tenuously in the hands of a very few individuals, entrenched powers, but one in which access to the free market, interdependent trade relationships with the rest of the world creates not just a vibrant, thriving middle class, but provides precisely the room for democracy, for freedom to grow from the ground up. Now, those of you who think China is not the best model, let me just remind you of something. Yes, it's true. China is by no means a democracy. No, absolutely not. It is a communist state, though, let's be frank, how you dare call yourself a communist state when you're the second largest market on the planet, that's another issue. But the China of 2010 bears no resemblance to the China of 2000. The China of 2000 bared no resemblance to the China of 1990. China is inexorably on the path to a different kind of future. But there's one thing that Iran has that China doesn't have, and that makes the China model, as it's sometimes called, a far more appealing issue when it comes to Iran. And that is that Iran already has the democratic institutions necessary for profound political change, profound political transformation, if it is given the opportunity to exert itself. And currently, thanks to 3 decades of sanctions and international isolation, they have not had that opportunity. Now, why do I say that this is sort of an appealing thing? You have to understand that regardless of your piety or your politics in Iran, what all Iranians have in common is an absolutely crumbling economy. The economy of Iran is on the verge of utter collapse. This is a country that has 40% of the population living underneath the poverty line. It's a country that has an official unemployment rate of about 25%, but unofficially most Iranians will tell you that's more like about 40%. It's a country with a 26% annual inflation rate. And let me just emphasize something. We're not talking about a hermit kingdom here. We're talking about a young, sophisticated, politically savvy, technologically sophisticated, as we know now, globalized population. A population that's 70% under the age of 30. 7 out of 10 Iranians are under the age of 30. 7 out of 10 Iranians were born after the revolution. This is a country in which the literacy rate for women alone is 90%, in which 60% of the college degrees go to women. This is a country that, because of its destructive economy, has no opportunity to give these young people, these young, educated, sophisticated, globalized population, an opportunity to thrive. That's the problem in Iran. That's what Iranians focus on. And so, in a sense, what we have done, the West and particularly the United States, in a 3-decade policy of isolating, sanctioning, and containing Iran, of isolating it from the rest of the world, is we have created precisely the situation in which we see now, in which this government is entrenched into every aspect of Iranians' lives. Make no mistake, a tyrant stays in power by isolating his people. We have done the tyrant's job for him in Iran. So the key to what happens in Iran lies not necessarily in Iran. It lies with us. It lies with those of us outside of Iran. Reform is inevitable in Iran. The tide of reform cannot be stopped. These kids, this 70% of the population, is not going to put up with the oppression that they have been dealing with much longer. They now have access to the rest of the world thanks to these new communication technologies in a way that they didn't have before. People always ask me, what change has Twitter and the internet brought to Iran? Well, let me put it this way. Let's play a thought experiment, if you will. Let's go back to 1989 and Tiananmen Square. Let's imagine for a moment if those tens of thousands of Chinese students who gathered in Tiananmen Square to demand greater rights, greater freedoms, and a democratic state, let's imagine if they had Twitter. Let's imagine if they had YouTube. Let's imagine if the Chinese government couldn't just simply kick all of the media out, turn the lights off, and massacre everyone without anyone in the world knowing what's happened. What would China look like today, 2 decades later? That's where Iran is right now. But, again, what happens in Iran? How fast reform comes to Iran, whether it's derailed or whether it's promoted, has less to do with Iran than it does to do with us. What do I mean by this? Well, this is unfortunately that moment when I am compelled by law to talk about Iran's nuclear program. I have no choice here, sort of compelled. If I don't, I have a little buzz that goes off and I get electrocuted. There is a lot to say about this intractable problem. Does Iran want nukes? Does it not want nukes? Depends on who you ask, I suppose. In the United States, our intelligence changes every year. Last year, our intelligence reports came out and said Iran is not developing a nuclear weapon. This year, it came out and said Iran is developing a nuclear weapon. Israeli intelligence has been saying that Iran is about a year away from nuclear weapons for 10 years. Kind of takes them out of the conversation somewhat. The truth is we don't know. We have no idea. But what we do know is, why wouldn't Iran want nuclear weapons? Why wouldn't they? What's the cost to not have them? They're in a region full of nuclear weapons. Israel, India, Pakistan. All of these countries have nuclear weapons outside of international law. They're not signatories of the NPT. And all of them, without exception, receive tens of billions of dollars from the outside world, from the United States especially. They haven't suffered for them. I mean, I don't mean to be glib here, but I have to say that I think Iran has probably learned a fairly valuable lesson from its fellow Axis of Evil members. One of them didn't have nuclear weapons. It was destroyed and occupied. The other one, North Korea, does have nuclear weapons. We are still pouring billions of dollars into that country just to get them to talk to us about those weapons. What would you do if you were Iran? The issue, again, is not so much about what's going on in Iran, but how we are going to respond to it. The international sanctions regime, as I said, that's been in place has been counterproductive, to say the least. But the worst thing that could happen is a military engagement by either the United States or by Israel. What would happen at that point? This discussion that is taking place now, the new beginning that I'm here to announce, would come to an end in the same way that 30 years ago, the new beginning in discussions about what the Islamic Republic was going to look like came to an end as soon as there was an outside attack. That's precisely what would happen. The progress would grind to a halt. So then, reform in Iran is inevitable. The new beginning is here already. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Because it is up to us. It's up to us in this room to make sure that our governments, that our policies are predicated to helping the movement for reform and democracy in Iran. It's up to us to pay attention. It's up to us to say to the Iranians that they are not alone, that we are all united in fighting for their rights and fighting for this new beginning. If you haven't figured it out yet, we Iranians love our poetry. So I'd like to end with a poem by Hamid Mossadegh called Blue, Gray, Black. Whoever keeps you and me from being we, let his house cave in. If I don't become we, I'm alone. If you don't become we, you are just you. If I rise, if you rise, everyone will be roused. If I sit, if you take a seat, then who will take a stand? Who will fight the foe, grapple the foul enemy, hand to hand? We are about to see a new Iran, for better or worse. What happens in that country still remains to be seen. But the tide of reform is inevitable. The new beginning that we have been waiting for has already begun. And it's up to us to make sure that the freedom, the liberty, the democracy that all Iranians yearn for, that all peoples of the world yearn for, becomes a reality. That it becomes a reality for the brave, for the bold, for the lords of this land. An independent, democratic Iran at peace with its neighbors and at peace with itself. As we say, inshallah. Thank you.